To understand this unlikely resilience, we should begin with the land itself. Geography as a hidden shield. When power in the Middle East is discussed, it often begins with oil. Countries like Iraq and Saudi Arabia hold vast reserves that shape their economies and attract foreign involvement. Jordan, by contrast, possesses almost none. At first glance, this scarcity looks crippling. A country with almost no fossil fuel wealth, arable land, or abundant water seems destined for weakness. Yet those very shortages reduce Jordan's appeal as a prize for outside powers. Where Iraq's oil or Syria's fertile fields draw foreign attention, Jordan's emptiness offers little incentive for conquest or heavy-handed intervention. The physical landscape reinforces this effect. Over three-quarters of Jordan is desert, dry plateaus and arid expanses that stretch east to Iraq and south into Saudi Arabia. These areas hold no major rivers, few productive soils, and limited infrastructure. For centuries, armies have largely bypassed these tracts in favor of more resource-rich destinations. Today, this same geography continues to work as an uninviting environment for sustained military campaigns. Occupation of such terrain can be done, but at crippling expense. Water, shelter, and supplies must be transported at high cost, making it far less rewarding than controlling lands that naturally generate wealth. What little fertile ground exists supports Jordan's concentrated urban corridor. Most of the population clusters along the western edge of the country, running from the north through Ammon to the south toward the port of Aqaba. Much of Jordan is simply too arid for dense settlement, which funnels communities into narrow bands of habitable land. While this creates reliance on imports for food and energy, it also delivers a subtle security advantage. Concentrated populations are easier for the state to govern. International reports from institutions such as the World Bank note that service provision and internal monitoring prove simpler when people are not spread thinly across large, rural territories. Jordan spends fewer resources securing its territory than neighbors whose populations are scattered across fertile valleys or long supply routes. This paradox extends to defense. The geography acts less like a wall and more like a calculation that shifts costs. Deserts raise the logistical burden on invading forces, reducing the incentive for adversaries to cross them in large numbers. Add to this steep features like the Jordan Valley escarpment near the Dead Sea, and natural barriers stack up. Armies can still enter, but holding the ground brings little material return. For Jordan, emptiness becomes an advantage. It discourages military appetite not because it guarantees safety, but because the balance of effort versus reward rarely favors outsiders. Internal stability also benefits. With Amman at the center of political and economic life, state authority radiates outward in a manageable way. The eastern desert provides a cushion that separates Jordan from the conflicts of Iraq, while to the west, the deep basin of the Jordan Valley slows rapid cross-border movement. Security services, working with this natural landscape, have been able to prevent the large-scale militant footholds that took root in Syria or Iraq. Geography does not make Jordan immune to threats, but when paired with professional intelligence networks, it has helped limit the spread of organized insurgency within its borders. Of course, scarcity brings vulnerabilities. Jordan must import around 70% of its food, and most of its energy comes from neighboring suppliers. These dependencies can pose risks in times of regional crisis. Yet when viewed from the standpoint of external aggression, the same shortages limit the gains an invader would reap. Toppling Jordan's government would not hand an aggressor rich oil fields or vast export agriculture. Instead, it would deliver the burden of supporting a concentrated population in a resource-poor land. To regional actors, it is cheaper and safer to leave Jordan intact as a buffer than to destabilize it. The result is a country whose resilience is built less on what it can offer and more on what it lacks. Where resources have doomed neighbors to repeated wars and interventions, Jordan's barren deserts make it strategically secondary. Where dispersed populations complicate governing elsewhere, concentration within a narrow corridor tempers the logistical challenge of state control. Taken together, scarcity and geography form a shield, imperfect, but effective enough to spare Jordan some of the worst turmoil in its neighborhood. This shield, however, does not leave Jordan isolated. Its position places it directly beside some of the region's most volatile countries, and that proximity creates pressures of its own. The way Jordan manages those pressures, existing between rival powers without collapsing, shapes its role not simply as a survivor, but as an unlikely buffer in the Middle East. The unlikely buffer state. On any regional map, Jordan appears vulnerable, a small state surrounded by instability. To the west lies Israel and the occupied Palestinian territories, to the north Syria, to the east Iraq, and to the south Saudi Arabia. Each border touches a zone of conflict or rivalry. Israel remains locked in recurring friction across its frontiers. Syria is still fragmented after over a decade of war, with militias controlling pockets of land. Iraq continues to struggle with weak institutions and competing armed groups. Even Saudi Arabia, wealthy and more secure, is tied up in competition with Iran while pushing through major domestic reforms. Jordan occupies a narrow strip between them all. From a distance, it looks like a country destined to crack under regional weight. Instead, it has developed a distinct survival strategy. It functions as a buffer state. A buffer state is not defined by its military strength or resources, but by its ability to position itself between rivals. Jordan has repeatedly chosen not to lean fully into one camp or another. Instead, it presents itself as a neutral ground, reliable enough for communication, flexible enough to be useful for everyone, and unthreatening enough that no one seeks to eliminate it. This balancing role creates a kind of insurance. For larger powers, dismantling Jordan would remove a space where indirect ties and quiet meetings are still possible. For international actors, Jordan provides an accessible location to move goods, deliver aid, and gather intelligence without planting large operational centers in more hostile arenas. The state's real protection comes not from force, but from necessity. The surrounding actors find value in keeping Jordan intact. One of the clearest examples of this role lies on Jordan's western border. In 1994, Jordan and Israel signed a peace treaty, making Jordan one of only 2 Arab states with a formal agreement of this kind. That treaty survives despite persistent tensions in the region. At the same time, Jordan is home to a massive Palestinian population. Roughly 2.4 million Palestinians are registered with UNRWA, many as descendants of families who fled earlier conflicts. This dual reality gives Jordan a position found almost nowhere else. It maintains peaceful, working relations with Israel while representing the concerns of Palestinian communities. That combination has allowed Jordan to act as a discrete channel during moments of crisis. In late 2023 and early 2024, for instance, Jordan's government coordinated humanitarian aid deliveries tied to the Gaza war and hosted meetings between international agencies and regional representatives when other venues were politically impossible. The country cannot dictate outcomes, but it offers a practical corridor for dialogue and relief that others struggle to provide. The northern frontier with Syria shows the same logic in a different way. The Syrian war forced more than 1 million Syrians across the border, generating one of the largest refugee crises in modern history. For Jordan, this posed 2 enormous pressures: the possibility of militants crossing into its territory, and the burden of hosting displaced people in a country already short on jobs and water. But Jordan did not shut itself off entirely. Instead, it ramped up border security while adopting policies that framed refugee hosting as a long-term, managed challenge. One such policy was the Jordan Compact of 2016, negotiated with international donors. which offered financing and trade incentives in exchange for Jordan granting refugees access to jobs. By 2024, more than 450,000 work permits had been issued to Syrians. This strategy limited the potential for unrest inside refugee communities while keeping Jordan from being seen as a partisan force in the war. Its stance was careful, engaged in humanitarian response, but not drawn into armed alignments. To the east, Iraq presented another set of dangers. For decades, Iraq has swung between war, insurgency, and contested governments. These shifts could have dragged Jordan into sectarian violence or militia conflicts. Instead, Jordan pursued pragmatic relationships with whichever government sat in Baghdad. Whether Iraq leaned closer to US backing or came under stronger Iranian sway, Amman kept trade routes open, worked on electricity imports, and handled transport for humanitarian supplies. For both regional governments and Western allies, Jordan became one of the few dependable corridors into Eastern territory. While Iraq's borders with Turkey, Iran, and Syria carried higher political and security risks, the Jordanian route allowed goods and aid to keep flowing under more consistent oversight. The southern boundary with Saudi Arabia highlights another dimension of utility. Gulf leaders regularly provide Jordan with loans, grants, and direct investment. According to World Bank and IMF data, these inflows remain a critical part of Jordan's fiscal survival. The motive is straightforward. Jordan's stability reduces the risk of conflict spilling over into Saudi territory. For Riyadh and other Gulf capitals, supporting Jordan is cost-effective insurance against wider chaos. Creating jobs, financing infrastructure, and supplying aid to Amman secures a buffer zone along their northern flank. For Jordan, the money and political backing offset its chronic lack of resources. The flow is not charity, but mutual interest. Jordan avoids unraveling, and its neighbors reduce exposure to turmoil moving closer to their own frontiers. The common thread is consistency. Jordan attempts to be indispensable in modest, practical ways. It cannot enforce peace between rivals, but it can provide neutral ground. It cannot host endless flows of refugees without strain, but it can signal cooperation with international frameworks. It cannot match the firepower of its neighbors, but it can guarantee predictability. The sense that no matter how ferocious regional rivalries become, Jordan will not tilt suddenly into one camp. That record has built unusual credibility, especially in a region where trust is often absent. For Western governments, Amman is one of the few capitals in the Middle East that reliably cooperates on counterterrorism, refugee management, and humanitarian logistics. For rival regional players, Jordan offers a low-cost channel that avoids the political cost of meeting in one another's territory. This positioning produces tangible outcomes. International aid is more willing to pass through Jordan than through fractured states like Syria or Iraq. Diplomatic actors can gather in Amman when they cannot in Jerusalem or Baghdad. Refugees and displaced persons find shelter in Jordan, not without hardship, but with more organization than in many nearby countries. These roles attract resources that help keep the country afloat, while simultaneously elevating its strategic significance. No actor gains by unraveling the one place that provides them with a workable platform. Survival, in Jordan's case, depends on turning vulnerability into leverage. It does so not through dramatic military power or abundant natural resources, but by offering just enough utility to each side that dismantling it seems costly. The paradox is that neutrality requires constant motion. The monarchy, security forces, and diplomats must always manage external expectations while keeping internal stability intact. Even minor missteps risk alienating patrons or inflaming domestic populations wary of regional conflict. Neutrality is not passive. It is an active balancing act that never stops. That balancing act, however, comes with pressures. Neutrality requires absorbing shocks that larger states deflect outward. The burden is carried not only by the leadership, but by Jordan's society itself. Refugee influxes reshape demographics, strain water and education systems, and increase unemployment competition. External support smooths the burden but cannot remove it entirely. Because Jordan positions itself as safe, it attracts displaced families and international expectations to share the load. And that weight falls heaviest on a state already managing scarce resources. Which leads to the next challenge: the impact of displacement on the country's stability. Jordan's ability to act as a neutral stage is closely tied to its hosting of some of the world's largest refugee populations. This reality presses against its economy and social fabric, creating strains that most countries of its size would not endure. Understanding how Jordan adapts to those demographic pressures is key to seeing why, despite limited resources, the country remains intact. Refugees and stability against the odds. In 2025, Jordan manages one of the world's most exceptional demographic challenges. With a citizen population of just over 10 million, it also hosts around 2.4 million registered Palestinian refugees and roughly 600,000 registered Syrians, with government estimates placing the true Syrian figure closer to 1.4 million if unregistered individuals are included. Smaller groups of Iraqis and Yemenis add to the total, creating one of the highest refugee-to-citizen ratios anywhere in the world. Hosting such large displaced communities both strains Jordan's fragile resources and secures international assistance that helps keep the country afloat. This dual effect, burden and survival tool, defines much of Jordan's modern stability. The Palestinian presence established the long-term precedent. Over successive conflicts beginning in 1948, Palestinians fled into Jordan in large numbers, with many eventually receiving citizenship. Over time, they became woven into the national fabric, influencing politics, business, and culture. This experience gave Jordan credibility as a state willing to absorb displaced people, even when doing so carried economic and political risks. When the Syrian war erupted after 2011, hundreds of thousands sought refuge in Jordan, some in camps such as Zaatari and Azraq, many more in urban centers like Amman, Irbid, and Mafraq. Unlike Lebanon, where tensions between host and refugee communities often spiral into crisis, Jordan has maintained relative calm. That outcome is not the absence of strain, but the result of deliberate framing. Refugees are portrayed as victims of larger regional disasters, and Jordan positions itself as the responsible host. Still, the reality on the ground is hard. Camps provide shelter but few opportunities beyond subsistence, and much of the Syrian population resides outside them, competing in an economy where unemployment hovers around 20%. For host communities, this raises anxieties over jobs, housing, and rising costs. For refugees, it means living with uncertainty. Work permits exist, but many labor informally and remain locked out of long-term security. Integration is uneven. Unlike Palestinian refugees of earlier decades, most Syrians are unlikely to receive citizenship. While many children attend Jordanian schools and develop local accents, their families face legal and economic barriers that limit permanence or upward mobility. Jordan has tried partial solutions. Through the Jordan Compact, a negotiated framework with donors beginning in 2016, the government expanded access to work permits for Syrians, with more than 450,000 issued by 2024. Some Syrians found work in construction, agriculture, and manufacturing, easing tensions at the margins. These programs, however, are no substitute for a full settlement of refugee legal status. They create practical breathing space but leave many families in limbo, balancing on insecure jobs and temporary permissions. What prevents this immense demographic pressure from turning into collapse is the way Jordan channels it into international support. Hosting refugees produces moral and practical leverage. Donors cannot ignore the strain, since instability spreading from Jordan would magnify crises elsewhere. This ensures that the country remains a high-priority recipient of aid. In recent years, Europe, Gulf states, the US, and UN agencies have provided billions in humanitarian and budget support. UNHCR and the EU fund education programs, healthcare, and infrastructure improvements designed to benefit both refugees and citizens, softening the risk of domestic backlash. Yet aid flows are uneven, and donor fatigue is rising. Funding levels for the Syria crisis response have dropped well below targets, forcing humanitarian agencies to cut food assistance and support programs. Policymakers in Amman must constantly remind international partners that Jordan's stability is not automatic. It requires sustained investment. This strategy has limits. A growing share of Jordanians see little improvement in their own lives, even as refugee numbers remain high. Housing in northern governorates is expensive, wages feel stagnant, and government services are stretched thin. Public frustration sometimes overlaps with political grievances, especially in moments of regional crisis. Protests in 2023 and 2024 linked anger over Gaza to demands for accountability at home, revealing how external conflicts, refugee policies, and internal repression intersect. Refugee hosting, then, acts only as a partial stabilizer. It provides grounds for external support and international legitimacy, but it does not erase domestic tension. The state works to avoid escalation. Its careful handling of narratives treats refugee presence as a humanitarian duty rather than an existential threat. Syrian children attend public schools alongside Jordanians. Clinics and hospitals provide services regardless of nationality. Official speeches frame Jordan as a protector in a dangerous environment. These choices strengthen the monarchy's regional standing and help prevent stark social divides. Still, the underlying competition for scarce resources ensures that integration remains fragile and incomplete. At a diplomatic level, refugee hosting elevates Jordan's status. International forums on displacement consistently feature Jordan's perspective, and regional or global leaders recognize its credibility. Unlike states that speak more than they deliver, Amman can point to hundreds of thousands of registered refugees and massive camps within its borders. This proof of responsibility bolsters Jordan's appeal for further financial contributions and extends its influence beyond what its size would normally allow. The importance of this role is amplified by geopolitical calculations. If Jordan were to falter, the consequences would reach Europe, the Gulf, and Israel almost immediately. That shared risk guarantees that, despite reduced donor enthusiasm, Jordan remains too important to neglect. There is also an economic dimension, uneven though it is. In cities like Irbid or Mafraq, landlords, grocers, and transport operators benefit from refugee-related spending. Aid money recirculates through local markets. Syrian labor, although underpaid, enables some sectors to function where Jordanian workers are reluctant to accept low wages. These micro-level economic benefits do not erase overall strain, but they add reasons for many Jordanians to tolerate refugee communities despite frustrations. The arrangement may be grudging, but it has helped contain larger turmoil. Over time, the presence of displaced communities shifts everyday life in more subtle ways. Children from Syrian families grow up speaking like local peers, attending the same schools, and building shared experiences. While legal barriers persist, social links gradually knit communities together in daily routines, through classrooms, workplaces, and neighborhoods. These ties do not resolve the structural inequities, but they make open hostility less likely by normalizing coexistence. The longer these relationships extend across generations, the more they act as informal buffers against sudden unrest. The consequences of failure, however, remain severe. If aid collapses further, or if new waves of displacement follow regional wars, Jordan could face levels of strain no system can quietly absorb. As of 2025, the state achieves balance by catching just enough international support to offset its internal pressures. This fragile equation means Jordan's stability is tied as much to external patrons as to its own policies. Ultimately, refugees in Jordan embody a paradox. They stretch services, elevate unemployment competition, and deepen public frustration, yet they also tie the country to international networks of aid and diplomacy that help secure its survival. Hosting displaced communities is not simply a matter of charity. It is also a hard political calculation that helps maintain Jordan's role as a reliable, if fragile, anchor in the Middle East.